Thank you for joining us today for our session on People to Know at the NCAA. As part of our 2020 Regional Rules segment, aligned with the session of Welcome to the World of Compliance for Division I Compliance Administrators, we have a few segments that we focus on introducing various staff members from across different departments that you likely will work with or have worked with, especially with compliance administrators, and trying to connect the dots between your role and what they do at the national office. My name is Angela Tressel, and I'm an Associate Director in Academic and Membership Affairs. And I am joined today by three lovely ladies. Sarah Hebert is an Assistant Director in AMA, and we will be asking questions to Susan Peel with the National Letter of Intent and Kara Carlson with the Eligibility Center. Thank you for joining us today, ladies.
Thank you, Angela.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. It looks like, Susan, we're going to start with you first and getting to know you during today's session. So I'm going to have a three-part question for you. Can you give us a brief introduction of yourself and your path to the NCAA, what your current position is today at the NCAA, and how long you've been at the NCAA National Office?
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah, and welcome, everyone. I wish we were in person, but I guess you're joining me in my living room now. So yeah, to answer your question, my intercollegiate athletics career really has spanned over the last 30 plus years. So I'll keep this very brief. I've had experience as a student athlete at Alderson Broaddus University, a coach at Winthrop University and Charleston Southern University, and then in compliance at Charleston Southern and The Ohio State University, and then the NCAA National Office. So I'm in my 21st year at the National Office, and during that time, I've been in three different departments. So Academic and Membership Affairs is where I started. The Eligibility Center and Law, Policy, and Governance is my current. So in my current role, I manage the NLI program and the transfer portal. So I'm Director of Governance, which again, that's part of Law, Policy, and Governance at the National Office.
As you oversee the National Letter of Intent program, can you provide our audience with some background on what the program entails?
Sure. The NLI program was actually established in 1964 as a program governed by the Division I commissioners. The NLI office then transitioned to the NCAA National Office in 2007. So although the day-to-day management was no longer with a conference office as it was before, the commissioners still govern the program. So what that means is that NLI regulations do not go through the NCAA governance process, but it is the commissioners that determine the NLI policy. And so what I do is manage the NLI operations, which involves close to 50,000 signees, 655 member institutions, and 55 conferences between Division I and Division II. So the buckets that it really falls into, as far as kind of my day-to-day life, is education outreach, interpretations, enforcement, appeals, and policy and governance of all, the NLI program.
Great. And a second question here is, how do you determine what those dates are for the next year? Because we get that question a lot, and a lot of times we just push them to you.
Yeah, it's actually a simple process. We have a formula that was created years ago that we follow each year for NLI signing dates. So what I do is identify the dates and then provide that to the commissioners to approve. Those dates are generally announced each February, each year, then for the upcoming year.
Great, I'm sure that's helpful. And for this audience is primarily newer compliance administrators. So, what advice do you have for this group as they may have some responsibilities with the National Letter of Intent program on their campus?
Yeah, it's definitely a collaborative effort, I'd call it, because you can't really talk about the NLI on campus without the involvement from financial aid, admissions, and then from the recruiting side with the coaches. So there are a lot of parts. So I would say for new compliance administrators, the best is to establish within your compliance office who has responsibility for what. Establish checklists for each step, since there is that coordination between financial aid, coaches, probably sport administrators in the compliance office. And then just being educated on the NLI. People are so used to going to the NCAA manual for rules, and you won't find NLI rules in the NCAA manual, but there's a host of NLI regulations. So really it's just being familiar and knowing where to find the answer.
Well, that's a great segue, Susan, because where can our audience find the information about the National Letter of Intent?
Yeah, it's in two places, the NLI website and the NLI portal. So the website is for public consumption. So there's a lot of information on the NLI website, from frequently asked questions to videos to one-page education documents. And then the NLI portal is only accessible to member institutions and conferences. So not only is the portal where our institutions will populate and upload NLIs, submit their NLI violations and their null and voids, respond to release requests, check NLI reports, but there's also resource section located in the NLI portal where the information that may not be found on the NLI website, because that's for the public, will be found in the NLI portal.
Great.
That's great. I think it's you haven't gone through your compliance initiation if you haven't put together an NLI. I can remember going on the typewriter, which now of course we don't do, and writing up financial aid agreements to get ready to send out and get that going. So pretty
You're showing
funny.
your age there, Sarah.
I know, right? All right, Susan, so you also manage the transfer portal. And for our audience, they may or may not know that that's very new. So what has your experience been with the transfer portal since the notification of transfer legislation was adopted back in, 2018?
As you mentioned, the transfer portal was implemented in October 2018 as a result of NCAA legislation changing in Division I from permission to contact to notification to transfer. I guess the key is to remember the transfer portal is a compliance tool to systematically manage the transfer process from start to finish. It starts with the notification of transfer when the student athlete enters the portal and entered by the compliance administrator. And it finishes with the student athlete's matriculation to another institution. So that's the actual, transfer. Although coaches have access granted to them from their compliance office, the transfer portal really has limited information for coaches, because for coaches, it is, designated to ensure that compliance, that they ensure compliance by who they can speak with. So who's been entered in the transfer portal as a student athlete to, like I say, to be in compliance with the legislation that was adopted back in 2018. I would say everyone, really has great interest in the transfer portal because of the numbers, the information that's in there as far as, the transfer data. The result of the data is that the membership's truly going to be able to understand the transfer landscape. What has been found to date is that the number of transfers really have not exploded with the portal. It is just, you hear a lot about transfers because we now have transparency, whereas there was not transparency with permission to contact. And we also are now in a world of social media where anyone looking to transfer is somehow reported on social media.
It really does paint a picture of what the transfer portal does, especially if you've just started your compliance career and you haven't had an opportunity to interact with. I'm going to assume, you'll definitely be interacting with it a few times a year at least. Well, Well, that's great. Where, as a new compliance administrator, where can they find additional information on the transfer portal and the ins and outs, how to work it, any other useful resources for it?
There's many resources available in the resource section of the transfer portal. I would say compliance administrators really need to pay attention to the announcements on the transfer portal homepage and the alerts that may pop up when you log into the transfer portal, because it's an alert for a reason. There's something that needs to be told at that time, whether it's an enhancement to the transfer portal or just a reminder. So yeah, it's going back to there's a lot of resources available if you just take the time and look through all of those educational materials.
That's great. We really appreciate you walking us through both the NLI and the transfer program, portal program, excuse me. What we will do at the end of the session is we will flash your contact information along with some social media handles up there for our audience to be able to take advantage of and reach out if they have questions. But we really so appreciate you, Susan, for taking the time out of your day to introduce yourself and give our folks a little snapshot of what you do.
Well, thank you definitely for the opportunity to join you today.
So I think we're going to transition to our friend from the Eligibility Center, Ms. Kara Carlson. Thank you again for spending some time with us to do similar to what we just did with Susan, ask you some questions and provide the audience with an opportunity to hear from you, because I know they probably have gotten emails from you or with you over the phone. So if you can do the same, if you can give a brief introduction of your path to the NCAA, what your current role is in the Eligibility Center, and how long you've been at the national office.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here. Like Susan said, I'm sorry I couldn't be there. We couldn't all be together in person, but I'm glad that we get to do it this way. I've been with the NCAA and specifically the Eligibility Center. I started back in 2007, pretty much right out of college. I was a member of the amateurism certification staff. So I was working to do amateurism reviews for Division I and Division II student athletes. And then I transitioned over to the academic review team where I reviewed initial eligibility waivers. So I've been on the amateurism and the academic side of the EC. But then in 2014, I actually took a job on campus. So I went to the University of Utah. I was the eligibility coordinator there. So I was in charge of monitoring the initial eligibility and the continuing eligibility for our student athletes there. So I do have some familiarity with campus life and the day-to-day. So I really appreciate all of you out there. I know how much work it is. But I did come back to the NCAA in 2017, and in my current role, I'm the Assistant Director of Membership Outreach and Education. So I work with every unit in the EC to just make sure we have the right resources and information out there for our member schools, that we have answers to your questions. I also do some outreach initiatives, things like regional rules. We try to do quarterly webinars. We have a monthly newsletter that we send out, so those types of things. And so in total, I've been at the NCAA about 10 years and then 13 years in college athletics.
That's certainly a great overview and a lot of time on the academic side with the Eligibility Center. I think as a new compliance administrator, you don't always know what each department does. And you hear the Eligibility Center, you have to, every prospect has to talk with the Eligibility Center. Can you give us a snapshot of what the big picture goal is of the Eligibility Center?
Sure. We call ourselves kind of the front porch of the NCAA because we're the first contact that most students have with the NCAA as a whole. Obviously, they have to go through our process in order to be eligible. So we're responsible for certifying the academics and amateurism of every Division I and Division II student athlete. And I think the best way to get a big picture is just to explain who we are as a department and what we do. We have our core processing staff, and they're the ones who are doing the certification. So they're reviewing the transcripts, they're reviewing the sports participation forms, and then We have a high school review team. So they work directly with our high schools around the country. They review schools, they review the non-traditional programs that are becoming more and more popular. They review core course submissions, and they work really hard to stay up to date on the trends that we have going in secondary education in the United States. And then we have an academic and amateurism review team. So they're the ones that will do the initial eligibility waivers. They do the PSA review process. And then on the amateurism side, they're the ones who take over those amateurism reviews that might require a little bit more membership collaboration. So every once in a while, you have a review where there's a little bit more back and forth. We need to ask more questions. We have a group that kind of takes over those reviews. And then we have an operations and analytical team that keeps us running. They keep our website going. They keep our internal processes going. They're behind the scenes, but they're really important to us getting the job done for students and schools. And then I'm sure most of you have spoken to the customer service staff. They're amazing. They're there to answer your calls, help with account review. And they try to do proactive work too. So when they see an account where maybe there's going to be something that requires a little bit more documentation, or they identify that this student's been to a high school with no core course list, let's get that process started. They're going to reach out to you and they're going to try and help you get going on that so we can make sure this review gets done. And then finally, we have our outreach and strategic partnerships, which is the team I'm a member of. And that's a group that does a lot of education. So they work with schools, they work with high schools, PSAs, coaches, parents, and our international community. And the goal is just to make sure that high school students are aware of the standards so that they can be prepared to meet those standards upon graduation, and then hopefully have a successful transition to college. So we have 6 groups that are working really hard just to make sure that we have student athletes who are successful and can meet those qualifier requirements.
Yeah, really appreciate that overview, because I think a lot of times people don't realize the amount of work that goes into the Eligibility Center staff and the different groups within the Eligibility Center. And there are other departments across the national office that have different groups within their own department. So that's really helpful to hear that overview. So appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree with Angela. That was great. I think that leads me into the next question for you, Kara. It sounds like you are the perfect person to ask. What are some best practices for new compliance staff members to help their prospective student athletes and their families through the initial eligibility process?
Sure, there's quite a few, but some that I think are great for compliance is to utilize our reporting mechanisms on the membership portal. So you can run reports for all the students on your IRL. You can see who has an open task on your IRL, so who's missing a transcript, who's missing a test score, get those out to your coaches so that they can work with their recruits to get those taken care of. And then you can even run a report on tasks that are open and require action from a third party. So we've had a lot of positive feedback about this report, because there's times where we need something for a certification, but we don't necessarily need it from the PSA. We need it from your institution, or we need it from the coach of their outside soccer team. So you can run a report just to see the open tasks that are in there that maybe you can actually take care of, like a matriculation letter. Those types of things can be really helpful. Also, just encouraging your PSAs, your recruits, to monitor their accounts and make sure they're accurate and up to date. A big one is making sure all the high schools they attended are in their account, and making sure their sports participation form has all their teams and all their tournaments in there, because things like that just help streamline the process. So if we know that on the front end, and we don't have to come back and ask for it at a later time, that can really make a difference in just getting the review completed. So that's a good one to work with your recruits on. And then if you have the resources on campus, and I know not everybody has maybe necessarily the staff and the time, but if you do, preliminary evaluations on campus can be really helpful, because while we're working hard to get them done for you, because we want to help, we do know that sometimes your coaches get those transcripts before we do. So sometimes they get them, they give them to you. We don't have them yet. So if you have the ability to do one for, kids coming on official visits, those types of things, it can be really helpful just identifying, hey, this student needs to add a class, maybe they need to retake the ACT or SAT. Identifying those things earlier, obviously really important. And then finally, utilize us, call customer service if you have a question. If you see something on a transcript that doesn't seem right, or you're confused by a preliminary evaluation we've done, you have questions, feel free to give us a call. We are more than happy to walk through that with you, hopefully point you to some resources that can help in the future, things like that. So definitely utilize our staff as well.
That's great. I think what I'm hearing is, early communication with your prospects and early monitoring. I know that's something when I was on campus looking at the IRL constantly, especially, during the end of the year and getting final transcripts in and making sure amateurism certification was complete. So yes, I think everyone can relate to that. That's good advice. So if I'm just slightly changing gears from the perspective of like a PSA, and maybe folks on campus are getting, visiting a high school. I know that's something that happens a lot to talk about initial eligibility. You get the question of, hey, I'm interested in being a Division I student athlete and dipping your toes in that water. What resources are good to pass along to prospects that are expressing interest and getting ahead of the game?
Yeah, we have quite a few of those. So, and you can find them all on our membership portal. They're all there on the resources tab. But probably the biggest one is the Guide for the College-Bound Student Athlete. It's a comprehensive guide. It's got everything about the Eligibility Center, like our registration process, the initial eligibility requirements for Division I and Division II. It has amateurism information. It has homeschool information, all those types of things that they need to know. But also it's a good intro to the NCAA. We have information about the NLI, scholarships, different information about the divisions, time management, and recruiting information. So it's a great guide to pass along to your coaches. It's a great guide, like you said, if you're working with high schools in the area and they have questions, direct them to that. It's geared towards the PSAs and their families. But it is comprehensive. There's a lot in there. So if you're looking for something a little bit shorter, we have what we call our initial eligibility brochure. That's on our nca.org website, and it's on the portal, and it's kind of a front and back breakdown of those Division I and Division II requirements. Just spells them out right there, spells out the registration process. That's a good one if you're looking to hand something out, or if high schools are asking for something that they can print out really easily and give to their students. Directing them the initial eligibility brochure is really great too.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Kara, the amount of resources that your group creates, and we didn't say this about Susan either, the amount of resources that Susan creates for the National 1110 is amazing. So if there's ever anything that folks need, I know they can reach out to you specifically and ask if they don't see it, but you all provide a lot of great resources. And even though you have those resources, this might be a fun question for you, but what's the most common question that you hear in your role?
I think, a couple come to mind. One is, when will this be done? And can I request an urgent certification? And so we absolutely understand the need for urgent requests, especially like end of summer, beginning of fall, anytime the season's about to start. And yes, you can request an urgent certification. We do have a great resource that's on the portal. It's called the Amateurism Academic Certification Request resource, and that spells out the status of accounts and what that looks like. So you can see the status of an account when you look up a PSA, and you know that kind of explains what it means. What does RTPF means? It means ready to process final. So it means we've got everything we need And yeah, you can request that urgent certification if you are waiting on, if you've got competition or if you've got travel, practice, those types of things. We have a 24-hour service standard for those once it's requested. So that's when we get a lot, and we point people to that resource so they know how to request that urgent certification, or they know how to look at the account and understand what that status means. So that's a big one. And then on the other side, the amateurism side, we get kind of a similar question, like, what are you waiting on? Why is this under review type of thing? Like, what's the problem? And like one thing that's been great in the past couple of years, we've actually had the ability so that now you can see those amateurism emails going back and forth between the student and our staff, or our staff and, say, like the soccer team that they competed on in their home country. So when you're looking at the account and you're like, I'm not sure what's going on with this amateurism review, you can click on that Access Amateurism Documents tab, and you'll be able to see the emails that we've had. And so that'll tell you, okay, now I know what they're looking for. Like, maybe it wasn't clear on the participation form that the student filled out, but now I get why we're waiting on something. Or now I know, I need to tell the PSA to have their coach respond, those types of things. So those are probably the two questions we get the most. And yeah, it's usually just about timeline and the status.
Great. Well, that is our final question for Kara, and we're wrapping up. And I know that Sarah has some contact information that she'll post up here, so I'll let her share her screen to do that real quick.
Both the NLI information right here that you can contact Susan if you have any questions related to the NLI or the transfer portal, of course, as well as you can see the website as well as social media accounts that are easy to access. For contact for Kara and some of the information that Kara was talking about, you'll be able to see right here the membership service line, as well as high school and public lines, as well as email information that you can use to reach out. So this will conclude today's session for People to Know. We appreciate Susan and Kara both joining us today to walk us through what they do on a day-to-day basis and their involvement in the national office. And be on the lookout for additional People to Know sessions coming your way.
Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.